Parshas Miketz. This week's Parsha describes the continuation of the confrontation of Yosef's brothers with Yosef and the interplay with Yaakov. Near the beginning, in the middle of the Parsha, this would be the beginning of Perek Mem Beis, that's chapter 42. Yaakov is assessing his options for how to deal with the latest famine. And in Pasuk Aleph, that's verse 1, it reads, Vayar Yaakov, and Yaakov saw, Ki yesh shever b'Mitzrayim, that there were provisions, food, in Egypt. Vayomer Yaakov levanov, lama tisra'u. And Yaakov said to his sons, why should you be, Art Scroll translates it as conspicuous, some translate it as in conflict. I'd like to focus on the next verse. This is Pasuk Beis, verse 2. Vayomer, and he said, Hinei shamati ki yeshev b'Mitzrayim. Look, I've heard that there are provisions in Egypt. Redu shama, go down there. V'shivru lanu misham, and get us food, provisions from there. V'nichyeh v'lo namus, and we will live and not die. That is a notable phrasing. It actually shows up again. The same phrasing of nichyeh v'lo namus shows up in the next chapter, Mem Gimel, Pasuk Ches, where Yehuda says to his father, send the lad, meaning Binyamin, with me, and we'll go. And we will live and we will not die. It seems extraneous, or at least repetitive. So there are indeed some commentaries who say this is a stylistic use of the words. This is the way it's done in Hebrew, that it's somewhat lyrical. We'll live and we won't die. In other words, it's a turn of a phrase, and one could even say that this is the Torah recording the speech of, in this case, two different people, Lashon B'nei Adam, the way people speak. The Seforno says, even if the food we get will not necessarily be completely satisfying, but it will still keep us from living. So there's a subtle distinction of nichyeh v'lo namus. In other words, we will barely survive, is the way this Seforno reads it. But lo namus, we won't die. The Hachayim says that actually there are two different concepts here. Nichyeh, he says, is to live b'ravchus, with abundance. And lo namus means at least there will be sufficient food to keep us alive. So, in other words, either v'nichyeh, we will live with a large amount of food, we'll be secure, and we'll go on with our lives. Or, lefachos lo namus, at least we won't die. So, we see that there are various approaches towards we will live that seem to be more than simply not dying. It sometimes does mean that. Sometimes does mean simply being alive, but sometimes it means more. The Hachayim, in his first commentary on this, his first explanation, actually distinguishes between nichyeh and lo namus. Nichyeh in olam hazeh, v'lo namus olam haba, and we won't die in the world to come. Why would that be even on the table for discussion? Well, if a person is suffering from a condition that could lead to his death, and there is a solution available, and he doesn't pursue it, then not only does he die in this world, but he's liable for his death in the world to come. So the Hachayim considers nichyeh and lo namus to be similar, except that one refers to the physical existence and the other refers to the spiritual existence. That is, the spiritual existence in the world to come. Now, there are several verses that if you think about them, it's pretty clear that they don't mean physical life when they refer to life. First of all, we talk about mayim chayim. Be'er mayim chayim, the Torah talks about. That's a well of fresh water. We don't have a concept of living water. I mean, we do as a result of this, we could say metaphor, but it means fresh water. We have Vatem hadvekim Hashem Elokechem Chayim Kolchem Hayom. Those of you who cling to God, to the Lord your God, all of you are alive today. Well, the people who haven't clung to God and are around and could cling to God are obviously alive as well. So there, alive must mean something other than simply not being dead. Let's look at a few more. Marpeh lashon eitz chaim. This is in Mishlei 15. It says a gentle speech is a tree of life, meaning it can give a person life. Now we're going to talk about it, but it obviously doesn't mean life as opposed to being not dead, because there are plenty of people who are alive who are exposed to harsh talk. Toras Chayim, Toras Chacham Makor Chayim. The teachings or the Torah of a wise person are the source of life. We have Ki Bam Chisani, La'olam Lo Eshchach Pikudecha, Ki Bam Chisani. This is from Tehillim Kuf Yotes 119, Psalms 119, which is, I will never forget your directives, because with them I have been kept alive. It likely does not mean not dead. How about referring to the Torah, Ki hi chayecha, the Torah is your life, or Shmor mitzvosai v'chyeh, observe my commandments and live. All of these imply some kind of animation that is besides not being dead. And let's take from Tehillim Kuf Yud Ches, Tehillim Psalms 118, which we say in Hallel, which is Lo amus ki echyev asaper ma'aseka. I will not die, but I will live, and I will declare the works of the Almighty. So we see from all of these verses that there is a usage of the word living, of the word Chayim, which means something more than simply not being dead. One of the commentaries on Onkelos distinguishes between Chai and Kayim, that Chayim means living, can mean simply living as opposed to being dead, and it can also mean continuity. So God is referred to this phrase originally, I believe, comes from Daniel in Aramaic. God is Chai Melech Chai v'Kayam, Malka Chai v'Kayama, God who is both alive and continuing in his existence. We have Shechianu v'Kiyamanu, who has given us life and continued our existence. Let's go back to those verses where life is more than simply not being dead, or Chaim is more than not being dead. The Netziv, in his commentary on this verse, says that there are two types of Chaim, of life. There's Chaim and not Maves, that's life and not death. And then there's, in his phrasing, Chaim Smechim Beli Itzavon B'Shiflus, a life that is joyful without sadness or a feeling of lowliness. One might even infer from the verse that we quoted from Tehillim that the thing that gives us that kind of life is telling over the works of God, is talking about Niflos Habore, is talking about the wonders of God. But we also know that words of wisdom from a wise man give life. And we also know that Hashem's Pikudim, his directives, give us life, and his Torah give us life. So in other words, there is a substantive study that can fill our lives with joy, with meaning, with substance, and keep us not simply not dead, but give us the animation, which in the words of the Netziv are Chaim Smechim, joyful lives. So listening to words of substance, listening to words of Torah, and actively praising God in appreciation for what we have gives us life in the sense of fills us with joy and fills us with meaning. And this is particularly appropriate on the holiday of Hanukkah, where we commemorate the valiant struggle of our ancestors to prevail over those who would rid us of those sources of life, of animation, of vitality. And with that, we light the candles, the or Hachayim, if you will, the light of life, to commemorate and celebrate both the struggle and the valiant prevailing of our ancestors, and also to inspire us to do the same in a world that's really dark sometimes. We have the opportunity to bring simcha, to bring joy, to bring animation and life to our existence by learning Torah and by telling over the wonders of God. Have a good Shabbos and a happy Chanukah.